Beneath the indifferent gaze of a frost-kissed moon, a single drop of blood bloomed like a forbidden rose against the endless white shroud of the world. Ilara's boots crunched through the virgin snow, each step a defiance against the numbness creeping into her bones. The wind howled like a chorus of forsaken spirits, whipping her tattered cloak around her like the wings of a dying raven. She was no longer the princess of shadowed spires and velvet thrones. Exile had stripped her of that illusion, leaving only the vampire's eternal hunger gnawing at her core. Banished from the crimson courts of her kin for a mercy they deemed weakness, sparing a rival's whelp during the blood wars, she wandered these northern wilds, a ghost in her own immortality. The air bit sharp, carrying the metallic tang of ice and distant pine. Her pale skin, luminous under the moonlight, prickled with the cold she could never truly feel, a cruel reminder of her undead curse. Eyes the color of polished obsidian scanned the horizon, where jagged mountains clawed at the sky like the fingers of ancient gods. She had fled southward from the vampire enclaves, but the blizzards had driven her deeper into wolf territory, where the scent of fur and fury lingered on the breeze. Rejection was a familiar blade. Her father's decree had echoed in the grand hall, his voice a whip. "Mercy is for the living, daughter. You are no longer of our bloodline." Cast out with nothing but the silver locket at her throat, a heirloom from her mother, etched with a crescent moon, cradling 3 tiny stars, she embraced the wilderness as her new crypt. Hunger twisted in her veins, not for blood alone, but for purpose. The locket swung gently against her chest, its chain cold as grave soil, a weight that grounded her amid the storm's chaos. Inside, a lock of her mother's hair, dark as midnight, whispered of lost warmth. Ilara paused at the edge of a frozen ravine, her breath misting in ethereal clouds that the wind tore away. The moon hung low, bloated and silver, casting shadows that danced like specters across the snowdrifts. Oofs echoed faintly from the east, wolf calls, primal and mournful, stirring something feral within her. She pressed on, the snow deepening to her knees, until a faint whimper pierced the gale. Not the wind, but something smaller, more vulnerable. Ilara's senses sharpened, the vampire in her awakening to the pulse of life nearby. She knelt, her gloved hands sifting through the powder, unearthing a hollow beneath an overhang of ice-crusted rock. There, huddled in a nest of frozen leaves and their own matted fur, lay 3 wolf cubs. Barely weaned, their eyes wide with terror, ribs stark against translucent skin. Abandoned, perhaps by a pack sensing weakness, or worse, culled in some brutal rite. One, the smallest, a silver-furred mite with eyes like chipped sapphire, nuzzled against her palm as she reached out, its tiny heart thundering against her skin. Compassion surged, unbidden and fierce, a echo of the mercy that had damned her. "Little ones," she murmured, her voice a silken thread in the roar of the storm. She could smell their fear sweat, the faint milk scent of their lost mother. Gently, she gathered them into the folds of her cloak, their warmth seeping into her eternal chill like a forbidden fire. The locket at her throat seemed to pulse, the 3 stars aligning with the cub's trembling forms, a sign, or mere coincidence in this godless frost. As she cradled them, rising to her feet, the wind shifted, carrying a deeper howl laced with authority and rage. Not the wild cry of rogues, but the command of an alpha, reverberating through the valleys like thunder trapped in ice. Ilara's instincts flared. Wolves did not tolerate intruders, especially not a vampire bearing their young. She scanned the tree line, where shadows coalesced under the moon's pale scrutiny. The cubs whimpered softly, burrowing closer, their trust a fragile gift she dared not squander. The night deepened, the snow falling thicker now, veiling the world in secrecy. Ilara moved swiftly, her lithe form cutting through the drifts like a blade through silk, the cub's weight an anchor to her wandering soul. Memories assailed her, the opulent halls of her father's palace, where blood flowed like wine and betrayal was currency. She had been promised to a warlord of the night clans, a union to seal alliances, but her act of pity had unraveled it all. "You weaken us," her father had snarled, his fangs bared in the torchlight. Now, in this frozen exile, she wondered if strength lay not in conquest, but in these small lives pressed against her. A distant fire flickered on the ridge, perhaps a hunter's camp or a beacon of peril. The Alpha's howl came again, closer, insistent, as if the very moon conspired to draw him near. Ilara's hand closed around the locket, its edges biting into her palm. Blood welled, a single crimson bead that stained the silver, mirroring the rose she had imagined in the snow. What was redemption, if not claiming the abandoned? She pressed on toward the uncertain glow, the cub's soft breaths syncing with her own undead rhythm, unaware that in saving them, she might awaken a king from his guilt-shrouded throne. The storm raged on, but in her arms, a spark of life defied the cold. Under the moon's watchful eye, the vampire princess became guardian to the Forsaken, her path twisting toward a destiny woven in fur, fang, and frostbitten fate. The fire's glow pierced the veil of swirling snow like a defiant ember in the heart of oblivion, drawing Ilara onward through the labyrinth of drifts. Her arms ached with the weight of the cubs, their fragile bodies bundled against her chest, a living pulse against the void within her. The smallest one, with its sapphire eyes, had ceased its whimpers, lulled by the rhythm of her strides, while the other two stirred fitfully, their tiny paws kneading at the wool of her cloak as if seeking a mother's teat long denied. The locket at her throat swayed with each step, the bloodied silver catching glints of moonlight, its 3 stars now smeared with the crimson echo of her resolve. What strength was this, she pondered, to carry what others discarded? Not the iron will of her father's court, where mercy was a blade turned inward, but something softer, more treacherous, a warmth that thawed the frost of her immortality. The wind clawed at her back, carrying the Alpha's howl once more, a sound that resonated in her bones like the tolling of a distant bell. It was no mere beast's cry. It thrummed with the weight of command, laced with a sorrow that mirrored her own exile. Fear coiled in her gut, sharp as fangs, yet curiosity bloomed alongside it, unbidden. Vampires and wolves were eternal foes, their bloodlines forged in the fires of ancient wars, claws against claws, thirst against fury. To approach that fire was to court death, or worse, entanglement. But the cub's scent, musky and innocent, anchored her. She could not abandon them to the storm's maw. As she crested the ridge, the camp revealed itself in stark relief against the night. A cluster of weathered hides stretched over bent branches, flames leaping from a central pit where logs crackled and spat, casting elongated shadows that writhed like tormented souls. Torches flickered at the perimeter, their orange tongues licking the encroaching dark, illuminating fur-lined cloaks and the gleam of iron blades half-sheathed. A lone figure stood at the fire's edge, his silhouette broad and unyielding, shoulders bowed under an invisible yoke. He turned as her footsteps crunched the snow, his eyes, storm-gray and piercing, locking onto hers with the force of a thunderclap. He was no ordinary wolf-shifter. The air around him hummed with alpha potency, a aura of restrained power that made the very flames bow lower. Tall and battle-scarred, his dark hair fell in unkempt waves to frame a face etched with lines of regret, a jaw clenched against unspoken tempests. A cloak of midnight fur draped his frame, torn at the edges from some recent fray, and across his chest, visible through the rent fabric, gleamed a cicatrice, ancient and jagged, silvered by old moonlight, a mark of kingship or perhaps of curses unbroken. Blood flecked his gauntlets, fresh and steaming in the cold, and his breath came in visible huffs, mingling with the smoke that curled skyward like prayers to forgotten gods. The cubs stirred in her arms, a collective whine escaping them as recognition dawned in their tiny forms. The alpha's gaze dropped to the bundle, his expression fracturing, rage warring with raw anguish. "You!" he growled, voice a low rumble that vibrated through the snow, stepping forward with predatory grace. "Thief of the Forsaken, return what is mine." Ilara halted, her undead heart stuttering in echo of their fear. Instinct screamed to flee, to bare her fangs and vanish into the night, but the connection sparked unbidden. His scent, wild as pine and iron-tanged blood, wove through her senses, stirring a primal pull she had no name for. Not desire, not yet, but a recognition of shared wounds, the exile in his eyes, the guilt that shadowed his stance like a second skin. She tightened her hold on the cubs, their warmth a shield against the chill of his approach. "They were dying," she said, her voice steady as polished marble, though fear's tendrils gripped her throat. "Left to the snow like refuse. I am no thief. I am their guardian now." He paused mere paces away, the firelight gilding his features, revealing the hollows beneath his eyes, the faint tremor in his fists. Up close, he was a storm contained, muscles corded from years of rule and ruin, yet his posture spoke of a king unthroned by his own hand. "Guardian?" He spat the word, but it cracked at the edges, betraying the melancholy beneath. "You know nothing of them. They are the last of my line, whelps of a queen I failed to protect. The pack cast them out in my weakness, and now you, a blood drinker, dare claim them?" His gaze flicked to the locket, drawn by its subtle gleam, the bloodstain catching the flames like a warning sigil. A flicker of something deeper crossed his face. Curiosity, perhaps, or the ghost of a bond neither could deny. The wind howled between them, whipping snow into a frenzied dance, while distant Weavos answered his earlier call, a chorus of the pack closing in. Ilara's mind raced. He was the Alpha King, Thorn of the Frostfang realm, whispered of in vampire courts as the ruler who had turned on his own during the last great war, sparing enemies at the cost of his throne. Guilt had fractured his reign, leaving him a wanderer haunted by duty's blade. She felt the pull intensify, instinctive as the moon's tide, yet she resisted, rationalizing it as survival's illusion. "If they are yours," she countered, chin lifting defiantly, "why were they alone? Your pack's mercy seems as fleeting as the snow." Thorn's eyes narrowed, pain flashing like lightning in their depths. He reached out, not in threat, but hesitation, his hand hovering near the cubs. The smallest one yipped softly, leaning toward him, and in that moment, the air thickened with unspoken possibility, fear mingling with the spark of empathy. The silver-furred mite nuzzled his fingers, its trust a bridge across the chasm of their kinds. He withdrew as if burned, jaw tightening. "The storm hides worse than wolves tonight," he murmured, voice softening against his will. "Rivals scent my blood in the wind. If you value their lives, or your own, come to the fire. But know this, I will not let them go without a fight." Ilara's breath caught, the philosophy of it all swirling in her thoughts. Was redemption found in reclaiming the lost, or in yielding to the storm? The locket warmed against her skin, an improbable heat, as if the 3 stars aligned with the cubs, and now with him. She stepped forward, curiosity overriding fear, the flame's warmth licking at her chilled form like a lover's promise. The night deepened, binding them in its lunar embrace, where denial was but the first breath of a destiny uncoiling. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments of the night they find you. The flames hissed and popped like secrets spilling from the earth, their heat a fragile ward against the encroaching night as Ilara stepped into the circle of light. Thorn's camp was a bastion of makeshift defiance, hides taut over snow-packed frames, a ring of sharpened stakes glinting with frost, and the acrid scent of smoldering pine sap mingling with the metallic bite of blood on the wind. The cubs in her arms squirmed, their whines softening to contented sighs as the warmth enveloped them, but Ilara's senses thrummed with wariness. His gray eyes tracked her every movement, a storm held in check, while the locket at her throat pulsed with an unnatural warmth, the blood stain on its silver face now a dried crimson sigil, binding her to this moment like an unspoken vow. She knelt by the fire, careful to keep the bundle close, and unwrapped the cloak just enough to let the cubs bask in the glow. The silver-furred one, the smallest, whom she had begun to think of as Luna in her mind, rolled onto its belly, paws stretching toward the heat, while the other two, brindled and bold, nosed at the embers with tentative curiosity. Thorn watched from across the pit, his massive frame silhouetted against the leaping tongues of orange and gold, the ancient scar on his chest rising and falling with breaths that seemed to carry the weight of fallen kingdoms. He did not sit, did not offer comfort. Instead, he paced the perimeter, his boots carving deep furrows in the snow, as if the act of stillness might unravel him entirely. "You tread dangerous ground. Blood drinker," he said at last, his voice a gravelly murmur that cut through the crackle of the fire. "My rivals, shadows from the old wars, hunt me still. They smell weakness in the wind, and now you've brought their prize into my lair." He glanced at the cubs, his expression fracturing again, guilt etching deeper lines into his weathered face. Ilara saw it then, the melancholy that clung to him like frost, the king who had spared lives in battle, only to watch his pack fracture under the banner of his mercy. Whispers from her father's court painted him as a traitor, but here, in the raw flicker of firelight, he was merely broken, a alpha burdened by choices that echoed her own. She met his gaze, her obsidian eyes reflecting the flames like twin voids hungry for truth. "And you? Would you have left them to the storm if I hadn't found them? Your prize was freezing, forgotten by the very blood that sired them." The words tasted bitter on her tongue, laced with the philosophy that had exiled her. What was power, if not the courage to defy the pack's cold decree? The wind outside the camp's edge howled louder, a harbinger carrying the faint guttural snarls of approaching foes. Thorn's head snapped up, his nostrils flaring, and in that instant the air thickened with shared peril. He moved to her side with predatory swiftness, his presence a wall of heat and fur-scented strength, positioning himself between her and the tree line where shadows stirred like awakening beasts. "Stay low," he growled, drawing a curved blade from his belt, its edge notched from battles long past. "They're here for the cubs, to end my line and claim the Frostfang throne. But they'll have to carve through me first." Ilara's undead instincts surged, fangs aching beneath her lips. As she gathered the cubs closer, their tiny hearts pounding in sync with the rising dread. She could flee into the night, vanish as vampires did, leaving this wolf king to his fate. But the locket burned against her skin, the 3 stars seeming to align with the cubs' forms, pulling her into the fray. Empathy flickered, unbidden. His guilt mirrored her shame. 2 exiles forged in the fire of compassion deemed weakness. The assault came swift as a blizzard's lash. Shapes erupted from the drifts. 5 wolves, hulking shifters in half form, fur matted with snow and eyes glowing amber with feral hunger. Their leader, a scarred brute with a mane of iron-gray, bared fangs in a snarl that reverberated through Ilara's core. "Thorn, the whelps die tonight, and so do you. The pack demands purity. No more of your soft-hearted rot." Claws raked the air and they lunged, a whirlwind of snarls and slashing blades. Thorn met them head-on, his blade singing through the night, blood spraying in hot arcs that steamed against the cold. He fought with the precision of a king, each strike a redemption for past failures. But they were many, and he was one, weary from the chase. Ilara's hand tightened on the cubs as one wolf broke through, lunging toward the fire with jaws wide. Without thought, she rose, her vampire speed a blur, interposing herself with a hiss that chilled the air. Her nails extended into claws, raking the beast's flank, drawing black blood that sizzled on the snow. It yelped, recoiling, but pressed again, and she felt the pull, the bond igniting like dry tinder. Thorn roared, dispatching another foe with a savage twist, and together they formed a barrier. His raw power, her ethereal grace, shielding the vulnerable flame side. The cubs huddled at her feet, Luna's sapphire eyes fixed on her with unwavering trust, as if sensing the shift from guardian to warrior. The battle raged visceral and intimate, the crunch of bone, the wet rip of flesh, the coppery reek of blood mingling with smoke. Thorn took a gash to his shoulder, crimson blooming through his cloak, but he pressed on, his gray eyes locking with hers in a moment of silent accord. Pain lanced through her as a claw grazed her arm, tearing fabric and drawing her own immortal ichor, dark and viscous. Yet in the chaos, empathy bloomed into something deeper. His glance held not just gratitude, but recognition, a thread weaving through the violence. They moved as one, instinctive, her speed countering his brute force, until the last rival fell, throat slit under Thorn's blade, the snow around the camp a canvas of red and white. Panting, he sheathed his weapon, blood dripping from his wounds to stain the earth. Ilara sank back, the cubs nuzzling her legs, their warmth a balm against the adrenaline's fade. The fire crackled on, indifferent, as the wind quieted to a whisper. Thorn knelt beside her, close enough that she felt the heat of his breath, the scent of pine and iron enveloping her like a cloak. "You fought for them," he said softly, voice rough with exhaustion and wonder. "For us. Why?" She touched the locket, its chain slick with sweat and blood, the symbol now a bridge rather than a burden. "Because abandonment is a wound we both know too well, and in this cold, mercy is the only fire that endures." His hand brushed hers, tentative, the contact sparking a current that defied their ancient enmity, a bond forged in shared defense, empathy hardening into resolve. The moon watched overhead, silver and serene, as the night settled, but questions lingered in the silence. Could trust bloom from such fragile soil, or would the past's shadows claim them yet? In the locket's glow, Ilara felt the stirrings of destiny, a quiet rinascimento amid the bloodied snow. The embers of the fire whispered secrets into the night, their glow a faltering heartbeat against the vast, indifferent dark. Ilara sat cross-legged in the snow, the cubs curled at her side like living shadows, their breaths sinking with the crackle of dying flames. Luna, the silver-furred one, pressed her muzzle against Ilara's thigh, a tiny anchor of warmth that seeped through the chill of her undead flesh. The battle's aftermath clung to the air, the coppery reek of spilled blood mingling with the sharp tang of pine smoke, while crimson patches marred the pristine white around them, blooming like accusations under the moon's unblinking gaze. Thorn knelt nearby, his broad shoulders slumped as he bound a gash on his forearm with a strip torn from his cloak, the ancient scar on his chest glistening with sweat and ichor in the firelight. She watched him, her obsidian eyes tracing the lines of exhaustion etched into his face, the way his gray gaze flickered toward the cubs with a hunger that went beyond possession. The locket at her throat felt heavier now, its silver chain slick against her skin, the dried blood on its face a stark reminder of the night's frenzy. It had warmed during the fight, an improbable heat that defied the frost, as if the 3 stars etched within had awakened to witness her choice. Empathy had pulled her into the fray, but now, in the quiet aftermath, doubt crept in like the wind's sly fingers. What bound her to this wolf king, this exile like herself? His mercy in the wars had cost him everything, much as hers had banished her from shadowed halls. Yet here they were, two fractured souls orbiting the same fragile flame. Thorn winced as he tightened the makeshift bandage, a low growl escaping his lips, more pain than threat. "The wound festers," he muttered, his voice rough as gravel under boot. Rival's claw carried poison, old venom from the blood wars. He glanced at her, his expression a storm of guarded vulnerability, the melancholy that defined him surfacing like a tide. Ilara felt the pull again, that instinctive thread weaving between them, resisted yet undeniable. Rationalizing it as mere survival's echo, she shifted closer, the cubs stirring with soft whines. "Let me see," she said, her tone steady, though her fangs ached with the proximity of his blood, rich and vital, a temptation she quelled with iron will. He hesitated, his hand hovering protectively over the gash, but the cub's trusting nuzzles seemed to sway him. With a nod, he extended his arm, the firelight gilding the taut muscles and the jagged tear that wept dark fluid. Ilara's fingers, cool as grave silk, brushed his skin, and the contact ignited something profound, a spark that raced through her veins like moonlight on water. She had always dismissed the old tales from her mother's locket, whispers of a lunar gift, hidden in vampire bloodlines, a pathfinder's sight that revealed destinies in moments of crisis. Mercy had been her curse, not this ethereal power, yet as her touch met his wound, the world blurred. Vision unfurled in her mind's eye, vivid and unrelenting, as if the moon itself poured its silver essence into her soul. She saw Thorn not as the broken king before her, but enthroned in a frost-bound hall, the frost-fang crown heavy on his brow, his pack whole and howling under a triumphant sky. The cubs, grown to majestic wolves, flanked him, their fur gleaming like starlit snow, but shadows loomed, Rival's fangs at the gates, a betrayal that echoed his past failures. Then, woven through it all, her own form appeared, not as intruder, but as key, her hand on his scar, mending the ancient rift, her locket's 3 stars aligning with the cubs to shatter a curse of isolation. Blood and fire mingled in the prophecy, his line restored not through conquest, but through the union of fang and claw, vampire mercy healing wolf's guilt. The revelation pulsed with spiritual weight, the Deusa's voice a distant weevo. The abandoned heal the abandoned. Redemption is the bridge between worlds. Ilara gasped, pulling back as the vision released her, her eyes wide with the echo of lunar clarity. The locket burned hot against her chest, the bloodstain flaring briefly like a living ember, confirming the truth. Thorn's gaze sharpened, sensing the shift in her, his alpha instincts attuned to the supernatural tremor in the air. "What did you see?" he demanded, his voice low and urgent, leaning forward until their breaths mingled in the cold. The cubs lifted their heads, sapphire and amber eyes fixed on her, as if they too felt the destiny uncoiling. She swallowed, the philosophy of it crashing over her like a wave. Strength was not in denial, but in embracing the unseen path. "A gift," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of revelation. "Mine, hidden until now. The locket. It showed me your throne, restored. The cubs, your line, unbroken. But it requires us, vampire and wolf, bound against the old enmities." Her hand returned to his wound, and this time she willed the power forth. A soft glow emanated from her palm, silver as moonlight on snow, seeping into the gash. The poison hissed, evaporating like mist, the flesh knitting with an ethereal hum. Thorn's breath hitched, wonder fracturing his stoic mask, his gray eyes locking onto hers with dawning realization. "You are the Pathfinder," he murmured, the words laced with awe and the melancholy lift of hope. "The one the elders spoke of in riddles, a light in the blood dark, to guide the fallen king. He reached for the locket, his fingers brushing hers, the contact electric, no longer resisted but accepted in the revelation's glow. The cubs yipped softly, circling them, their warmth a symbol of the Renacimento stirring. Yet doubt lingered in his eyes, the guilt's shadow. Could he claim this destiny, or would his past's betrayals doom them all? Ilara felt the bond deepen, empathy transforming into purpose, the moon overhead casting its approval in prismatic light on the bloodied snow. The night held its breath, the fire's embers flaring as if in benediction, while the wind carried distant uivos, warnings or welcomes it was too soon to tell. In that fragile interlude, Thorn saw her not as foe, but as the key to his fractured soul, the vampire princess who turned rejection into revelation. But destinies forged in blood demanded proof, and the rival's scent still tainted the breeze, promising trials yet to come. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. The moon hung like a severed crown in the velvet sky, its silver light fracturing across the bloodied snow, as if weeping for the choices yet to be made. Ilara stood at the edge of the camp, the locket's chain a cold noose against her throat, its blood-stained stars pulsing with the echo of her revelation. The cubs slept fitfully in a nest of furs by the rekindled fire, their tiny forms a fragile testament to the bond she had forged with Thorn. But peace was a lie in these northern wilds. The wind carried the guttural snarls of the approaching pack, a tide of fur and fury cresting the ridge like shadows birthed from the earth. Thorn's hand rested on her shoulder, heavy with unspoken alliance, his gray eyes scanning the tree line where amber glints betrayed the eyes of his former kin. The rivals from the night before had been scouts, harbingers of a greater storm, the remnants of the Frostfang Matilha, fractured by Thorn's mercy in the Blood Wars, now rallied under a traitor who hungered for the throne. Ilara felt the weight of it in her undead veins, the philosophy churning like frost in her core. What was freedom, if not the liberty to choose forgiveness over the blade? Yet the pull toward Thorn, no longer resisted but a quiet fire in her chest, complicated the moral labyrinth. He was the king who had spared her father's envoys, an act that ignited the vampire wolf truce's collapse and her own exile. Guilt shadowed him still, a cloak heavier than the midnight fur he wore, and now, in the revelation's wake, she saw her role not as savior, but as mirror, her mercy demanding his redemption, or their mutual ruin. The pack emerged from the swirling snow, a dozen strong, their half-shifted forms hulking against the night, muzzles elongated, claws glinting like scythes, breaths steaming in primal rage. At their fore loomed the traitor, Garrick, once Thorn's beta, his iron-gray fur scarred from battles they had shared. His eyes burned with betrayal's venom, fixed on the cubs as if they were the last threads of a tapestry he sought to unravel. "Thorn," he snarled, voice a thunderous rumble that shook the flakes from the branches. "You slink in the shadows with a bloodsucker's whore, clutching whelps you couldn't protect. The Matilha has spoken, your line ends, your throne is mine. Surrender them, and perhaps we'll let you crawl away to die alone." Thorn stepped forward, his blade drawn in a fluid arc, the ancient scar on his chest flaring white under the moonlight as if the wound itself protested. Ilara sensed his turmoil, the melancholy coiling in his stance like a serpent, the king torn between duty's call to reclaim his pack and the guilt that whispered he deserved none of it. "Garrick," he replied, his tone low and edged with sorrow, not fury. "You twist our laws to feed your ambition. These cubs are the future, not pawns for your war. I spared lives in the Blood Wars to end the cycle, vampire and wolf alike. You call it weakness, I call it the only path to survival." The pack growled in unison, circling the camp's perimeter, their paws churning the snow into bloody slush. Garrick's laugh was a guttural bark, devoid of mirth. Survival, Your mercy cost us the eastern territories, invited the night clans to our borders, and now you ally with her? His gaze snapped to Alara, fangs bared in disgust, the air thickening with the scent of his disdain. Musk and old rage. She stood resolute, the cub's whine stirring her protective instincts, Luna's sapphire eyes peeking from the furs as if pleading for the choice she must make. Freedom beckoned. She could flee into the eternal night, abandon this wolf-haunted folly and reclaim her solitary exile. Or embrace the bond, fight for a destiny that wove their wounds into strength, forgiving the past that had scarred them both. Ilara's hand closed around the locket, the blood within it seeming to thrum with the Diusa's distant uivo, a spiritual summons to transcend the hatreds of old. "He speaks truth," she interjected, her voice silken yet unyielding, carrying over the snarls like moonlight-piercing clouds. "I am Ilara, daughter of the Crimson Courts, exiled for the same mercy you scorn. These cubs were cast to die. We saved them. Is your pack's purity worth drowning in more blood?" The words hung heavy, a moral gauntlet thrown into the frost. Garrick lunged forward, but Thorn met him mid-stride, their clash a visceral symphony of steel and claw, bodies slamming into the snow with bone-jarring force. The battle erupted in chaos. Wolves swarmed the stakes, tearing hides and splintering wood, their howls a cacophony that drowned the wind. Ilara moved like liquid shadow, her vampire grace a counterpoint to the pack's brute onslaught. Fangs extended as she intercepted a she-wolf aiming for the cubs. Claws raked her side, drawing dark ichor that steamed on the cold ground, pain blooming sharp and real through her numbness. Thorn fought at her flank, his blade a whirlwind, but Garrick pressed him relentlessly, their history fueling each strike, Beta against King, loyalty turned to venom. "You abandoned us!" Garrick roared, pinning Thorn against a fallen log, jaws inches from his throat. "For pity's sake, you let the vampires live!" Thorn's eyes met Ilara's across the fray, a silent plea amid the blood spray. Forgive or condemn. She saw the dilemma etched in his face. The choice between war's easy fury and the harder path of compassion. With a surge of her Pathfinder's gift, she channeled the locket's power, silver light flaring from her palms to blind a encroaching wolf, buying Thorn a breath. He twisted free, driving his blade into Garrick's shoulder, not to kill, but to wound, a mercy that echoed his past. "No more abandonment," Thorn growled, voice breaking with the weight of it. "Join us, brother, or fall to your own hate." Garrick staggered back, blood matting his fur, his pack faltering as the vision of unity rippled through them, the cubs' yips a call to the old bonds. Ilara knelt by the fire, shielding the young ones. Her heart, undead yet aching, torn between love's fragile promise and the freedom of solitude. Forgiveness could rebuild the Matilha, crown Thorn anew, but at what cost to her shadowed soul? The traitor howled in defiance, rallying his loyalists for a final charge, the snow churning red under the moon's indifferent gaze. In that crucible, Ilara rose, the locket's stars aligning with the cub's eyes, forcing the judgment, war or peace, captivity or release. The night demanded her answer, blood and fire the only witnesses to a soul's unraveling choice. Thorn's blade trembled in his grip, the pack's circle tightening like a noose, as Ilara felt the spiritual rift widen. Destiny versus the liberty to walk away, her mercy the scale that could tip empires or shatter them forever. The wind wailed, carrying the scent of impending sacrifice, leaving her poised on the precipice of renascimento or regret. The snow churned beneath the onslaught, a crimson whirlpool swallowing the world as Ilara's vision narrowed to the Frey's heart. Thorn locked in mortal grapple with Garrick, their bodies a tangle of fur, fang, and flashing steel. The locket seared against her skin, its bloodied stars a frantic pulse, urging her toward the precipice where choice alone could forge or fracture the dawn. The cub's whines pierced the chaos like fragile arrows, Luna's sapphire gaze locking onto hers from the fire's edge, a silent plea that unraveled the last threads of her resistance. Freedom whispered temptations of eternal night, solitary and unscarred. But the bond with Thorn, rationalized as instinct, resisted as folly, had bloomed into an ache deeper than her undead hunger. Love was no reward, but a trial of the soul, demanding she heal what rejection had torn asunder. Garrick's jaws snapped inches from Thorn's throat, the traitor's growl a venomous tide. "Your mercy ends here, King of Ghosts!" The pack surged, claws rending the air. But Ilara felt the Pathfinder's gift ignite within her, silver light coiling through her veins like moonlight unchained. She rose, the wind whipping her cloak into raven wings, and plunged into the melee, her form a blur of ethereal fury. A wolf lunged at her flank, its amber eyes wild with pack loyalty turned savage. She met it with claws extended, not to kill, but to channel the vision's grace. Her touch grazed its muzzle, the locket's power flaring outward, a radiant wave that rippled through fur and flesh, freezing the assault in its tracks. Visions assailed them, not vengeance, but the Matilha whole under a restored throne, cubs grown to guardians, enmities dissolved in shared blood under the moon's benevolent eye. The pack faltered, howls twisting from rage to confusion, as the spiritual echo of her gift pierced their frenzy. Garrick reared back from Thorn, his scarred form trembling under the onslaught of revelation, eyes widening with the weight of what he had forsaken. "What sorcery is this?" he snarled, but his voice cracked, the iron of ambition yielding to doubt's subtle thaw. Thorn seized the moment, shoving him into the snow, blade poised not for the killing stroke, but hovering, a judgment deferred. Blood streamed from his wounds, steaming in the frost, mingling with the drifts to form rivulets that traced patterns like lunar runes. Ilara knelt beside him, her hand finding his, the contact a conduit for the healing light. "Choose," she whispered, her voice a silken command laced with the philosophy that had defined her exile. Power through compassion or chains of endless war. The Deusa offers no other path. Thorn's gray eyes met hers, the melancholy lifting like mist before the sun, guilt's shadow pierced by the spark of acceptance. He had resisted this pull, rationalizing it as a king's duty to reclaim alone, but in her gaze, he saw the truth. The vampire princess, rejected for mercy as he had been, was the key to his renascimento. With a nod etched in resolve, he lowered his blade, the ancient scar on his chest glowing faintly under her touch as the silver light knit his flesh. Garrick staggered to his paws, the pack circling warily, their breaths heaving in the sudden hush. The traitor glanced at the cubs, now venturing from the fire with tentative yips, Luna leading the trio toward the fray's edge, a symbol of innocence reclaiming the wild. "The line endures," Garrick rasped, the fight draining from his frame like blood into snow. "But if this is your vision, prove it doesn't doom us all." Ilara extended her hand, the locket swinging free, its chain a bridge across the chasm of old hatreds. The power surged once more, enveloping the pack in a dome of prismatic light, visions unfolding for each. Futures where vampire and wolf forged uneasy peace, the blood war's scars healed by alliances born of shared wounds. Garrick bowed his head, not in submission, but surrender, the moral weight crushing his ambition. One by one, the wolves knelt, their howls shifting to mournful harmony, the wind carrying the sound like a prayer to the frost-kissed moon. Thorn rose, drawing Ilara to her feet, his arm encircling her waist with a possessiveness tempered by reverence. The bond sealed in that embrace, no longer denied, love as redemption's forge, their union a sacrifice of solitude for the greater flame. The cubs tumbled into Thorn's legs, nuzzling with joyous abandon, their warmth a balm against the night's lingering chill. Ilara felt the locket cool, its bloodstain fading to a faint roseate memory, the 3 stars now serene emblems of destiny fulfilled. Rejection had been their crucible, her banishment from crimson courts, his dethroning by guilt. But in this Renascimento, they emerged whole. The pack gathered around the fire, rekindled to a roaring blaze, torches flaring to life as the first hints of dawn bled purple across the horizon. Thorn's voice, steady now, addressed them. No more exiles. We rebuild, fang and claw united, under the moon's witness. Garrick nodded, the traitor's fire dimmed to embers of loyalty reborn, the Matillas Huevos rising in unified chorus, a symphony of forgiveness that echoed through the valleys. Alara leaned into Thorn, the scent of pine and iron enveloping her, his heartbeat a rhythm syncing with the cub's breaths and the distant pulse of the wild. Pain had birthed this, choice had tempered it, and now, under the moon's fading gaze, they stood as one. King and princess, guardian and heir, their love a quiet revolution against the cold. The snow settled, blanketing the bloodied field in pristine white, a canvas renewed. What was strength if not the mercy to heal across divides? In the fire's glow, Ilara traced the locket's curve, feeling the stir of true life in her veins, a spiritual awakening where destiny and freedom entwined like lovers in the frost. The northern winds hushed, carrying the promise of thrones reclaimed and wounds unbound, as the first light kissed the peaks. Redemption was no crown of gold, but a flame kindled in the heart of exile, enduring against the endless night. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.